meetup, where we will connect together on everything related to data and AI on Azure, Microsoft Azure platform. So today, let's look through our agenda. So about this meetup is actually to enlighten and to connect experts and enthusiasts in the data space, especially people on Microsoft Azure. And today's agenda will be something of migration, database migration from on-prem to Microsoft Azure. A lot of us have a lot of software. So a lot of us has a lot of legacy application that sit on on-prem database, and then as a digital transformation goes on, we didn't want to restrict ourselves to the organization firewall. We want to move some of our databases to Microsoft Azure. So we'll be looking into that today, and we have a wonderful speaker in the person of Paul Barnabas. Is an expert, a seasoned expert in the field. Myself also, I'm Tobi Kazeem by name. I also work on Microsoft data platform, Power BI, and Microsoft data platform generally, Azure Data Factory, Databricks, and likes anything related to data platform. So I have Paul here. Paul is a business intelligence manager, and is also a data expert on Microsoft solutions, and is also consult for his main company here, so in Nigeria. So you are welcome, Paul. Today, I believe Paul have prepared everything ready to take us through, to walk us through how we can understand database migration from on-premises, SQL Server, MySQL, whatever it is, from any on-premises environment to Azure, what it takes, what we need to understand, the prerequisites, what we need to plan, the planning stage, the security, and everything. So I welcome you all, users, all participants to the call once again. You are welcome, and I believe this is going to be an eyes opener and a very knowledgeable and knowledge transfer session. So thank you all for being here. I would love to see you once more next week, and we'll always to see you with us. So Paul, thank you. I hope you are ready for us.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much for the warm welcome, Tobi. So let me go ahead and share my screen.
Thank you.
Okay, please, can you confirm if you can all see my screen?
I can see your screen.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for this session of the African Data and AI Weekly Meetup. Today, we'll be talking about database migration from on-premises to Azure. So Tobi has rightly introduced me, somebody who has passion for impacting knowledge, either formally or informally. I mentor and coach individuals around data, around business intelligence. I have a couple of experience in the industry, and I've been doing BI for a couple of years. And outside of training, I also lead a BI team with an FMCG here in Nigeria. And what I would be talking about, as I initially said, is database migration from on-premises to Azure. Our agenda for today's session are those. So we'll be looking at the current state of relational database management system and the future. We'll be looking at the concept of the on-premises. Why do we need to start considering cloud, to host our information in databases? Migration life cycle, as the core of today's class is around migration. We'll be looking at the life cycle of migration from on-premises to the cloud. We'll also talk about the tools, different types of upgrade of migration tools. We will look at that, and then we'll go into a live session where we'll talk about migrating an on-premises database with a data management assistant, tool, one also via the use of SSMS. All of this will be clear as we go along the line. And then at the end of it, I'll share a few resources which we can leverage on, for further learning. Okay, so without any further ado, I would go about introducing, the content of today. So you might be wondering why would I want to consider in the first instance moving my infrastructure? That's in terms of data, in terms of databases from on-premises, to the cloud. And this gives us more of like an analysis of, what makes up on-premises database infrastructure. As you can see, about 93%, of relational database management systems reside on premises. This is an analysis that was done 2016. Obviously, looking at today's context, this has improved because the era of cloud has been more affirmed, has been more adopted as the years goes by. So as you can see here, we can see that as at that time, we just had a few, percentage of the whole market share that were cloud-based. The whole portion was on premises. So we would also be looking at the advantages of why we should consider cloud, right? So data infrastructure, the cloud infrastructure is a very large, very large business. As you can see, this is about $266 billion, and it's saying 62% of cloud as a platform for modernization of IT environment. So what is saying in terms of adoption, right? As we can see, the cost of the gross revenue, right, for cloud adoption is about 30%. And one of the reasons why individuals and folks want to essentially move from on-premises is because they want to reduce cost. So let's evaluate what it takes to run an SQL database or have an SQL server on premises. You need to look for a location, physical location. You need to buy the infrastructure, such as the servers. You need to buy the SQL license. You need to buy electricity. You need to also employ resources such as a database administrator. So all of these are multiple costs that are required. They are running costs that are required. So not just in terms of personnel, there's also infrastructure, there's also the monetary cost of this. So, and that's where cloud shines, because you can, essentially increase your total cost of ownership, when you move to the cloud. So, there are different types of databases in Azure. So there's the Azure SQL database, there's the Azure SQL managed instance, there's the SQL server, right, in the virtual machine. So all of these things are options that you can leverage on within the cloud. So based on your preference, based on the compliance level, based on the security level that you want to achieve, all of these things can be accommodated when you move your infrastructure from on-premises to the cloud. Right. So I move on. So talking about the migration life cycle. So basically, these are just guidelines, are just steps that you can follow through when trying to migrate your resources or your data from on-premises. So there's a discovery session, you assess your on-premises infrastructure and where you want to deploy in the cloud, find out compatibility level, find out collision levels, if they are the same, all of these things you can do. And where there is a need for you to convert or modify the objects you have on premises to suit what you would have in the cloud, you can also do that here. And there's an iterative process, so where you look at remediating the applications, you have performance testing, you optimize it, and then you carry out your migration. So this would involve your schema, your object, and then also your data, right? So here you now have your data sync, and then you cut over, you end the whole process of the migration. So as I said, during our demo, we would be considering two methods of carrying out this activity. Okay. Okay. So moving on to upgrade and migration tools. So these are different types of tools that can be used when it comes to migration. And, we have different types of resources when it comes to SQL database. As you can see in this first tab, we are seeing from legacy SQL databases or SQL servers, you can make use of the DMA and the DEA to migrate to a higher version of SQL Server. So the current version actually we have now for on-premises is SQL Server 2019. But you might be moving from SQL Server 2008 and with the use of your data management assistance or your data evaluation assistant, you can migrate your information or evaluate or assess, the information between your source and then your target. So when it comes to other sources like SAP, like Symebase, like IBM, like Oracle database, MySQL, you can leverage on the SQL Server migration assistance or the data migration, the data Azure data migration service to move your database or your SQL infrastructure from that server to Azure. Yes. So when it also comes to SQL Server to Azure, which is the core concept of today's class, you can leverage on your data management assistance or your Azure data migration services. So this data migration services is a cloud and Azure-based service. The DMA is an application that works on your Windows PC. Okay. So to give a bit of context, what you use your Microsoft Data Migration Assistant, your DMA for is, for rich assessment at scale. It gives you recommendation, and then it also does a schema conversion. So it helps identify what are the differences between, the source and the target, makes recommendation, you apply appropriate schema changes or conversion, and then you can go ahead with your migration process. Then from the aspect of Azure, right, you have the Azure Database Migration Service, so this helps with both Microsoft and non-Microsoft support. So either you are making use of an SQL server or a Symebase or an Oracle or or an SAP database, a SAP HANA database, all of these can be accommodated with the Azure Database Migration Service. Okay, so moving on to the Database Migration Assistant, the DMA. As I said, this is a Windows application that you can install, and it helps, you evaluating your current infrastructure, which is your source, and your target, which is Azure. So as you see, it assess and identify issues. It goes back, it fixes those issues. Then you deploy your schema to the cloud. Okay. So I don't know if there are any questions at this point. So let me just take questions before I move on. So is anybody raising his or her hand or has any question? Okay, so I move on. I move on. So the Azure Database Migration Services, as it says, it helps accelerate your journey to the cloud. It's a seamless end-to-end solution that helps you migrate information from whatever vendor, either Microsoft or any other vendor, to the relational database in the cloud. Okay, so this is just a bit of more concepts around the DMS. So here it said it gives a near to zero downtime. So you basically experience minimal downtime during the process of migration. So you can be having your online transactional server or database running, and alongside also carry out your migration process. So that's still running, and then you seamlessly carry out your migration. You can also migrate at scale. So scale from multiple source to your target database. So no matter the version or the type or the vendor of database, right? You can deploy all of these, for example, into a single Azure SQL database or an Azure SQL, managed instance. And then it helps optimize IT infrastructure. So what this does now is the beauty of leveraging the cloud is now, before I was worrying myself about the cost of electricity, the cost of infrastructure, the cost of bandwidth, the cost of the servers. A server, for example, maybe has a life value of 5 years. In the next 5 years now, I'm thinking of upgrading that server, my SQL license. All of these things are essentially avoided, when you are leveraging, for example, an Azure SQL instance or managed instance. So these are some of the advantages. So it is fully managed by Microsoft. All you need to worry about is how you create your objects, your schemas, and how you do your migration of data. Okay. So a more detailed representation of how the data Azure data management services, how data migration services work. So you have the DMS service, you have projects that you create. Within this project, you can have multiple projects, you can have different sources, right? You see the list of databases that you have within that source, right? So you can have multiple projects. It's just like as if you are trying to build an application, a .NET application. So you can have a project, you can have within a solution file multiple projects. So such as what's existing here. So different databases that, so this can probably be for a sales project, they can be for a production project, and maybe this is for supply chain, so you have all of those individual databases. And then with the use of workers, right, you run your migration. There's a level of validation, and then all of your information, both the schemas, the objects, are migrated to the target database. Okay, so these are just two different representations. So if it's an SQL managed instance, or it's just simply an Azure SQL database, these can be accommodated when you are trying to carry out your migration. So at this point, I'll be going into the demo. But before I do that, I want to just get to know if there are questions. If there are questions. If not, I go on with the demo session.
Hi, Paul.
Okay.
I don't think we have any question for now. I think they can actually emphasize more on the data migration and the difference between data coupling and data migration, DMS service and data coupling operation, because I know a lot of couple of participants and enthusiasts always mistakenly takes them differently. What's the difference between migration and coupling data? So I
Okay.
think it can also emphasize on that. So if we have
Okay.
any questions, I think participant can drop on the chat board. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Toby. Yes, so to clearly state, the migration services are divided into two, and it depends on the tool you are using. So for the database migration assistant, the DMA, this helps you with the deployment of your schemas, your objects. So it helps create a connection between your source and your target, carry out an assessment, fix whatever needs to be fixed, and then it moves the schemas or the object. But for copying, that involves copying of the data itself, the data existing within the tables, within the views. All of this information are essentially copied from your source to your target. So I go on to the demo. So I have an SQL server currently deployed on premises. Like this is my, I will assume this is my server on my laptop currently. And as you can see, I'm going to try and connect to that instance. And this is the instance. Click on connect. And as you can see, I have a database already existing here. The name of the database is called AdventureWorks LT 2024. And within this database, let's go through the objects that we have. So we can see we have multiple tables. We have two schemas here, the DBO schema, the sales LT schema, and a couple of tables against each of these schemas, right? Let's see, do we have some views here? So we have some views also
Oh, hello, Paul.
existing here. Yes?
Yes, I think Umana hands is up. So maybe he has
Okay.
another question. I'm sorry
Okay,
to cut.
thank you. No problem. Please, can
Mm.
you go on with
Uh,
your question? When?
Umana, so can you?
Hey, Paul.
Yes.
Yeah, can you hear me, Paul?
Yes, I
Yeah,
can.
you can.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Please, can you make it a slideshow? Someone has posted on the question that, can you make it a slideshow, please, so that it's easier to follow you?
Oh,
Can you?
okay, no problem.
Yeah, thanks very
That's
much.
fine. You mean when presenting, right? I'll do that. I'll do that. So
Yeah,
currently we are
yeah,
in demo session. So,
yeah,
but
yeah,
when I
You
yeah.
get
can.
back to my slide, I'll do that.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I appreciate that. I appreciate the
Thank
feedback.
you.
Okay. It's a
Thank you.
pleasure. Yeah.
Thanks for the feedback, please.
Yeah. Okay. So as I was explaining, I was trying to explain what we currently have in our demo database. It's called AdventureWorks LT 2014. And I was just listing out the list of objects that we have, within that database. Okay, that's fine. So as I said, one of the tools that we can make use when trying to migrate is the data migration assistant. So you can always search for it. For example, you go to Google and do data base migration assistance. Okay, go to the website here and download the application so that we do not dwell too much on the process of installing. So you'd find it here. The latest version is v5.4. You click on download and you install. The installation is very seamless. So once you do that, you would have the application and it looks like this. So you get started by creating a project. So I click on the plus sign, and I'm going to give it a name. So I say question. Okay, and it's asking the assessment type. So do I want to assess a database engine or an integration service? For now, I'm going with the database engine. So it's asking what is the source server type. The source server type, right, is an SQL server, and the target is an Azure SQL database. So, but before I go on here, let me take you now to Azure and introduce Azure, because we'll need to pick some information in our target. Our target is an Azure SQL database. So let's now all go to Azure. So basically, you can access the Azure website by going to portal.azure.com. So for those who will be hearing about Azure, or who's just hearing about Azure for the first time, you can easily come to Azure and then sign up for an Azure free trial. They give you $200 of free credit, which gives you access to some Azure products and services. So this helps you, and this for 12 months, right? For 12 months. So you'll be given a subscription, and with this, you can go ahead creating an Azure SQL server or database. Okay. So I'm just going to go about creating. So I would go about creating an Azure SQL server first, because your database has to reside inside of your server. So I'll go about creating that right away. School SQL. So under the Azure SQL, there's a search bar. You can simply just search for SQL server. So I'm doing an Azure SQL server, right? I have one currently there. I'm going to try and create a new one. Okay, so I have my subscription selected. It's asking for the resource group I want to add it to. So I want to add it to an existing resource group called PB databases, right? It's asking for the server name. So I'm calling these Africa AI group. Okay, so I'm just calling this Africa Data and AI, right? So that's fine. It's asking for the location. So location is where most of the SQL and the Azure instances are available. So we have them scattered around the world. One in South Africa, we have a whole lot in US, in Europe. It's always ideal that you select a region that is closest to you. So we have Europe, West Europe, right? So I like to use West Europe. It's one of the closest regions or locations that we have, closest to Nigeria. So it's asking me for an SQL admin login. Okay, so I'm simply going to call that okay. So let me just note this down so we can always reference this. Okay, so our server admin login called data admin. Okay, that's fine. Put in a password. Your password must be alphanumeric. I would also confirm that here. Okay, then it's asking me to go to the next tab, which is networking. Allow Azure services and resources to access the server. Yes, I want that to be available for other services within Azure. Okay, Azure Defender for SQL, not now, because this is going to bill me extra. Okay, let's call this Africa AI. Okay, is the name of a tag. Okay, and that's fine. At this point, I'll go ahead and create it. So it's saying the estimated cost per month is no additional charges. So I'm simply just provisioning an SQL server instance, right? And then the database is what I'll be built on. So that's the beauty of it now. Yeah, so because the server here will be managed entirely by Microsoft, all I'll need to worry about is the database that I'm actually deploying in Azure. That's what I'll need to pay for. So let's just give it a few seconds to try and create. So it's currently deploying the SQL server. So the moment the SQL server is fully deployed, we'll be able to create our target database. Okay. Okay, still currently being deployed. Okay, so let's give it a few more seconds. It should be through. Let me just try and duplicate this tab. In the interim, while it's loading, let me try and show you the interface of an existing SQL instance, Azure instance. Okay, so directory. Okay. Okay, I think it's true. So let me go to the resource. Okay, fine. So as you can see, an SQL server has been created called Africa Data AI, right? This is the server name, Africa Data AI .database.windows.net. Okay. We can see we provisioned it to be in West Europe. So all of these informations are available, right, for us to use. When I go to my SQL databases, we can see we do not have any existing database at the moment. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to try and do at this point now is to create a database. So you come to your overview, you can see create database. So I click on create database. Okay, yeah, so it has populated a few information for us because we are within the context of that resource group. Okay, so all we need to do now is just give the database a name. We are referencing what we have here in the SSMS. So let's just say AdventureWorks LT24, okay, 2014. AdventureWorks LT 2014. Okay. Do you want to use an elastic pool? No. It's asking us to specify the compute and storage. So this is where you configure the type of SKU. So for selecting a database, there are different SKUs, so you can select the one that is most suitable for yourself, right? So this is compute here is the processor, the virtual core. Storage is in terms of the size where your data or your logs, will be kept. So at this point, I just need the basic tier. Okay, so this gives me 2 cores. Okay, this gives me what now? 5 basic units, 2 gig. Okay. So I'm applying that right away. Backup storage redundancy. Okay, so this is where you specify if you want your backup to be available across regions or across locations. So this is locally redundant backup. This is zone redundant. So you can create zones and have them available across those different zones. And this geo redundancies, they will be available across the different locations. Okay, so I stick with the default. And I go to networking, saying add current IP address. Yes. So I want to add the current IP address. So by default, there's a firewall rule that blocks anybody access to your database or to your server. So you have to create a rule for every user who needs to connect. And this is the reason for this is because of security. So what I'm saying by checking this box is that I want the current IP I'm using to access, the Azure platform to be added. So when I connect to it from my SQL Server Management Studio, I will be able, it will recognize me, recognize my IP, and I'll be able to connect to the server or the database. Okay. So specifying is saying I'm going to spend $15 per month okay, so this is just for the Azure Defender, so I don't want that right away. Move on, use an existing backup, none. Okay, so here I'm specifying the collection. So this is also very critical. So collection is just defining rules that that are synonymous to the way information are stored in a database. So one thing I can do is to go verify the collection I have also in my source, right? And tally that with what I have in my target. So as we can see, we have SQL Latin General, for the database collection here in Azure. I can go and validate this, the one I have on premises, right? By right-clicking here, going to properties, and then looking at under the general, you can see maintenance collation, and you can see SQL Latin 1 general, right? See what we have here, SQL Lat1 General. So as you can see, the collation of both, right, are synonymous. So that's fine. Okay, so Windows, so here I'm configuring the time when maintenance should happen. So system default says 5 p.m. to 8 a.m. So that's fine. Okay, so I'm paying for about $5, per month for this particular tier, and I go ahead and I create my database. So what we just did, or what we've been doing so far, was to configure the database that would sit within the server that we've initially provisioned. So by the time this is done, right, we would now be able to continue with our data migration effort, with the data migration assistance. So we already have our source database existing on my local PC. We've gone ahead and provisioned the destination or the target database in Azure. Okay. So the deployment is currently running. So in the process of that, let's go back to our DMA. So I'm going to click on my create button here. Okay, so we are selecting the type of information or evaluation we want to carry out when comparing our source database to our destination or target database. So it said check database compatibility, check feature parities. So these are basic informations that are or assessment that are required to help identify if my migration process will be seamless and will be smooth as possible. Okay, so I leave these two checked and I click on next. So here is asking me to specify my source server name. Okay, so I go to this portion, let me click on trying to connect. So this is my server name for my source. I click copy, I go to my DMA and paste the information here. Okay, yes, I want to use a Windows authentication. Yes, I trust the server and I click on connect. Okay, so it's asking me now to select the database I actually want to compare or I want to migrate. So if I had multiple databases existing within this server, it will all be listed here. But I'm interested in this, so I check this and I click add. Okay. So that's for the source. So I'm going to try and carry out my assessment first. Okay, so it's telling me that I have, it's an SQL server, it's a SQL 2017 server, and it's giving me a few helpers information. So, well, first of all, I have a check mark that is green. This gives me, this is a good sign. That's under feature parity, and it's saying, it's giving me a recommendation here. It says the trace flags are used to temporarily set specific server characteristics or to switch off a particular behavior. So it said choose the right SQL database service tier and performance level for single databases and elastic databases that match your workload. So this is just, an advice. So if it requires me going back to tweak, I would have to carry out that activity. So coming to compatibility issue, yes, it's saying the element user, blah, 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 has property type. Okay. So one of the things that's going to happen is that it's not recognizing. So this local or service account is not recognized or useful within Azure. So it's recommending that I do not migrate it. Sometimes it gives a recommendation here. But for me, what I would do, as I don't have any recommendation, is that I would not migrate that user. I will simply stick to either an SQL, a local SQL user login or password. I would preferably do that. Okay, so that's so far the information I have. So click on upload. Now it's asking me where's the environment. It's an Azure environment. Yes, I'm connecting to it. So here I want to try and log in to the environment that has my just a moment, where my SQL, my Azure SQL server is installed. Okay, so let me get the username and password of my Azure portal. Okay, so it's trying to load my subscription. So MSDM platform, yes. Azure Migrate project, okay. Fantastic. So this leads us into a portion of the tutorial whereby we need to have a project, an Azure Migrate project, which is responsible for migrating the objects and also copying the data. So this takes us back to Azure. So we've done something within Azure. We've been able to create a server. We've been able to create our database. The next thing we are going to do now is to go ahead and create a migration project. So I call this Azure Database Migration Project. So I'm going to create a new project. Okay, so I think we'd even just leverage on one that has been created initially. So just give me a moment, a sec. Let me go to services. So I have within my service, I already have an initial service. So I'm just going to start this service. Let's just give it a few seconds trying to start that service. So this is the Azure Database Migration Service that would be responsible from the cloud to be able to go identify my on-premises database source and then also link up with the one in Azure. And then we can do a comparison of the schema, we can do the migration, we can do the copying of the data itself. Okay. Just give it a few more sec. So in the interim, if there are any questions, please, you can ask them or you can drop them in the group chat.
Hi, Paul. Can you hear me?
Hello, Tobi. Yes, I can.
So I think we have a question from Emmanuel. Can we migrate multiple databases at the same time? Or in this instance, we only had one database to select. So I think you can differentiate on database Azure managed instance also. Maybe you can give just a small light about how managed instance can help too.
Okay, so that's a very good question, right? Yes, so if you have multiple databases, yes, you can migrate them. And as I explained initially, we have a couple of options, when it comes to different types of databases or servers in Azure. We have the SQL database instance. You have the SQL managed instance. So the difference between the normal SQL database, the normal Azure SQL database and the managed instance is that with the managed instance, you get updates. So it's been managed by Microsoft, but it's been updated also on the backend on a regular basis, right? And with this, you can actually migrate multiple databases. in our own scenario, we only had one database to work with, and that's why we selected it. So but outside of that, if we had multiple databases, yes, we would be able to migrate them. We simply just go ahead, select those multiple databases, and go on with the migration process. Okay. Trying to refresh. Let me see what's going on here. Service. Still running. Still.
Sorry, one question for me. My name is
Okay,
Adidayo.
please go ahead.
Say, for example, you have your database, on-prem database is on the server. The migration tool you installed, it needs to be installed on that same server, right? Not on your own local machine.
No, it doesn't have to be on that, as long as the application or the computer or server or whatever tool you are using can have access to your source database or server. You can install it on any machine. So if it were probably existing in one location, maybe one co-location center, all I need is access to that target. So the tool will go and locate the source, wherever it is that is installed, and then carry out the migration process. So it doesn't have to be on the same machine. It doesn't have to be on the same machine. All that is required is connection to that server.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's just give this a sec. I don't know
Good
why. Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Paul.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Yes. Yeah, apologies. I'm new to migration world, so if I ask anything, please don't feel silly question. I just wanted to be sure this data migration assist, is it similar to Power BI, please?
Okay.
Is it exactly similar?
Okay, that's a good question, right? So no, they are actually two different things. So what we are talking about is basically related to SQL Server and databases. For Power BI is a reporting tool. Power BI simply connects to an SQL database as a source. It goes there to pull information. So it can either connect to an on-premises SQL instance, pull information from that database, or it connects to an Azure instance and also pull information. So what we are simply talking about here in the context of this class is related to SQL Server and databases. But for Power BI, it's essentially different because it's more of a reporting tool. It can simply just connect to any one of these infrastructure or data or tools that we're talking about to pull information from. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. It does. Okay.
Okay. I think I might need to.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think I might need to create a new one. I've been trying to restart this so that I don't go about creating it again, but it looks like it's delaying. So let me go about. So what we are trying to do now is we need to create an Azure database migration service, which will help us create a project that will be used for actually doing the process of migrating. What we did initially with the DMA was to access our source. So with the use of the database migration service, we'll be able to also link to our on-premises infrastructure, do a comparison, and then carry out the migration process itself. So let me go ahead and use my PB database, Azure Group. So calling these ADA, that's for Azure Data and AI Migration. Okay, I want this to be in Europe. Oh, so looks like we do not. Okay, West Europe, yes. So my pricing tier, we configure these. I want to use the basic, just the basic. Okay, and apply that. Okay, click on networking. Yes, put on this. Okay. Head and I create. Okay, so this is currently being created. Okay, so if there are also questions, please share your questions with me. If there are questions, let me know. So as I said, what we are currently doing now is trying to create the migration service. Okay. Deployment in progress.
And Paul, if when we're home and we want to practice this whole demo, this is all things we have to go through, right? We have to go through each step.
Yes, you would have to go through each step. Exactly.
Okay.
So, as I explained earlier on, for those who might be new to Microsoft Azure, you would simply go to portal.azure.com, you would sign up, and it will give you like $200 worth of units, your subscription for 12 months, which you can use, to test run these activities.
Azure.com.
Okay,
Thank you very
just
much.
waiting for this to complete.
Hello, Paul. I
Yes,
think
go on.
so I think time is fast spent, but
Okay.
at least I'm very sure the participant knows what it takes to migrate database from on-prem to Azure, especially using the DMS services and providing what the DMS services always do to provide guidance and also help you.
Hello, Tobi. Yeah, so it looks like our time is fast spent, but if we do not mind, we could round off now, or we could just spend a few more minutes to complete the class. So this is up to us to decide. Hello, Tobi.
Can you hear me, Paul? I think I
Yes.
lost network.
Yes. So I was saying that if the class do not mind, we could spend a few more minutes and conclude the class. Else, we'll round off now and probably would have another session where we'd spend more focus on the Azure migration and data services.
Can you hear me, Paul?
Yes, I can.
Oh, I think my network dropped.
Okay.
Okay.
So
So,
yes,
okay.
it looks like we have it already created. Or let me see if it's running. Let me see if it's running. So it says there's a great job, blah, blah, blah has been created. Deployment is still in progress.
From my side, I think it's actually a wonderful session. I think the keynote, Gideon has his up. So let's allow Gideon to maybe has a very good question. Gideon, you have the floor. Please also participants try to make use of hand raising before bringing up the before coming up. So Gideon, you are recognized, please. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So I'm quite new to the Microsoft Azure. I would like to know if it can exist both as an OLTP and OLAP process.
Okay. So your OLTP, right, is your online transaction, your online operational online transactional processing system, right? And you have your online analytical processing system. So, basically within the context of Azure SQL Server, it can be used for the online processing. Yes, so in the context of OLTP, yes, you can carry it out for that if it is for analysis services. So OLAPs, an example of an OLAP is SQL Server Analysis Services, right? Which you can also migrate. So, but that is a bit different from this. What we are using this for basically is if you have an database that is used for online transactional processing, yes, you can carry out the migration, you can go ahead with it. So you can see that the options we even have when we're trying to select, they are limited to just Azure SQL Server, Azure SQL instance, and the managed instances. So those are the options available within this context. But if we are to go about doing that for analysis processing, right, we might have to use a different tool to achieve that.
All right, thank you.
So, Gideon, in a bit to that, there is Azure Analysis Services, there is Azure Synapse that can actually make provision for the OLAP layer of your environment on the cloud. Okay, so Paul, you can go ahead. Yes, you can lower your hand. Thanks.
Okay, so I was thinking we'll be able to, the service is not back up. Okay, let's see if we can leverage on this. Okay, so the service of the migrate staging to DB is up now. Okay, so let me go ahead and see if I can make use of this within the concept. Okay, so let's create a project for this. Okay, so the project name is LT 2014 migration. My source is an SQL server, moving to Azure SQL database, and the activity is a data migration. Okay, create and run the activity. So what I just did was to provision a project. So as we saw in the slide, we can have a project that is responsible for the activity itself. There's a service that is like the foundation on which the project would run. So we already had the service provisioned. Now we are provisioning the project. So here it's asking me that what is my source SQL Server instance? So that is local based. Just a moment. Should have this now available. Do Azure connecting to my instance. So I'm having difficulty at this point recognizing that project. Just a moment.
Hello,
yes.
okay. Maybe I would suggest you just give because our time is fast spent and
Past spent, okay.
we also
So
yeah
what would
we just
happen
give
is
a
we might
closing
continue. So what would
next time.
happen is exactly. So we might have another class where we talk about the process in the cloud. So essentially, what is next after this is to be able to connect to that project in Azure and then configure the information of the destination. And once that is done, we'll do the comparison between the schema. Once that is validated, it moves the schemas, that's the object in terms of the tables, the views, the users, and then we go ahead copying the data itself. So we would have to continue that in a different class. So at this point, I'll be rounding off. If anybody has any question, please go ahead and ask those questions.
So I think the meetup has a question. So we can actually do a part 2 maybe next week.
Hello.
So that it's the transfer is actually continuous.
Hello.
Hi,
Yeah.
go ahead with your question.
Yeah. Okay. What I want to say is that is it not possible for you to do the video at your own time? That's maybe private session. Then you can upload it to the channel for us. Is it not possible? Then we'll go through.
Sure.
That's. But yeah, it's always good to be. It's a meetup, it's a user group, so it's not teaching.
Why I'm saying it because since there's some interruptions today, so probably maybe later. That is just an option anyway.
Okay. So we look into that. Is either we take the part 2 next week, or we try to upload the remaining part of this section. So we'll look into that preferable, and we'll let you know. So just follow up with our channel, and you'll get the latest update. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the contribution, man. That's wonderful. So Temitope, also you have the floor. You are recognized. Hello, Temitope. Temitope, you have the floor.
Sorry, I just spoke, so I've raised down my hand.
Okay, it was Temitope. Okay, Umana. Okay, so I thought it was Umana speaking before.
Okay. Hey, thanks very much for this session. Really enlightening and refreshing. But I got 2 contributions to make. Yeah. Number 1 is protocol for observing timing. Yeah. It's very important that when you set this session and say, you know what, it's going to be for 1 hour or 30 minutes, that we keep to the timing. That's very important. And it's also very important that you stick to the protocol. You have to establish a protocol for managing the time effectively. Like if people are going to ask questions, they ask questions at the end of the session. Yeah. Or if you invite people to ask questions, maybe when people speak, someone speaking not more than a minute, they got to structure so that you can manage the time effectively, so that at the end of the day, the timing you set out for it, you covered the objectives for it, so that people will come back next time. It's just a contribution. Thanks very much. Very enlightening, and I look forward to more sessions.
Yeah, thanks, Umana. Thank you very much. That's a very good one. We keep learning and we keep accommodating. So we have actually captured that. That's for you. So next one, we'll stick to time. Exactly by 1 hour, we'll end the session. And then about questions, we'll only accommodate questions that are typed. The user the speaker can pick it up at any point and answer them. So we only take like 10 minutes to the end of the session, the voice question. So thanks a lot, Umana, for that. So I think it has been a wonderful one. Paul have really done justice, open our eyes to DMS, how we can migrate database from on-prems, the guidance, and a lot of things we need to know. So thank you all participants. Follow us, engage us on our YouTube channel, on other social media meetup. Try to look up for the registration link for the next session next week. We'd love to have you next week. So thank you very much. If there is only no other question, I would love to say thank you very much. Goodbye. Thank you, Paul. Thank you all. Goodbye.